Hello and welcome to ATARC's Federal CIO Virtual Summit. My name is Kirsten Patton and I'm the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to thank our partners today over at Anchor, Pure Storage, and Zimperium for helping us create today's event. Additionally, I would like to thank you all at home for joining us today. This will be an informative event full of discussion from federal CIOs on the topics such as hybrid workforce, emerging technology, IT modernization, and the Cybersecurity Executive Order. I would like to remind you all that after each panel and keynote, there will be time for a Q&A. So please place all of your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I also want to remind you to answer the poll questions as they come up throughout today's panels if you would like to be eligible to receive your CPE credits. So to start us off, I would now like to introduce our visionary keynote, the Chief Information Officer, the Assistant Inspector General for Information Technology over at the Department of Health and Human Services, Gerald Karen. Jerry, over to you.
Good morning, Kirsten. Thank you, and thank you for having me. Hopefully, I provide something visionary today to get you guys started off on your CIO Summit. Always happy to be here. Looking forward to learning some more and hopefully sharing some ideas with you guys. For those of you that don't know, I'm also the chair for ATARC's Zero Trust Working Group as well. Very proud of what that working group has done, and also did the TIC 3.0 prior to the Zero Trust. So some great things that are coming out of ATARC. So I'm very happy to participate in those and highly recommend engaging in some of the working groups that they have here. So one of the things, knowing the subject and for the CIO Summit that we're having, wanted to talk a little bit about. I've had the advantage of being a newly minted CIO. I started here officially of May of last year. So a lot of things have been doing. Of course, want to bring new technologies and modernization, and for lack of a better term, the new normal coming in during these times. During the pandemic, or doing mass telework and remote work and things like that. So it was a different time to come into a new job, most certainly. How to engage with staff and things like that. It was challenging switching jobs during this time, but been very happy and happy with the way things are going. So I wanted to kind of talk about and send a message. So what one of my approach was, like I said, being new to the organization, a new culture, because previously I came from a large organization at the Department of State, very different culture. I'm still in some culture shock some days, but my approach was, let me understand what's going on. Let me see what's going on. Let me look at what the culture's like and things like that. So, did I bring in any special frameworks and things like that? No, my motto is always to keep it simple. So, my observations was the organization was very reactionary, very tactical, good at what they did, really good, smart people, really attentive and able to get the job done. But they were overwhelmed with managing priorities and things like that. So, going back to basics. All right, was there a strategic plan? Not really an essence of a strategic plan. There was kind of concepts and ideas, but nobody following a real strategic plan. So started there, developed a strategic plan, a multi-year plan, which I will share on the screen here. And what we did is we developed a one-page of that plan, so that people could easily read it. So we started with our vision statement, and we wanted to optimize the IT investment for the portfolio and direct it towards the mission and business. Why? Because HHS OIG was not here to be the mission, but or the IT shop was not here to be the mission, but we are here to enable the mission. So have to kind of sometimes remind your engineers and IT staff that you are not the mission. You're here to help the mission. The HHS-OIG is here for fraud, waste, and abuse, to oversee programs of HHS and things like that, and do opioids and organized crime and fraud, waste, and abuse investigations and audits and things, and all of those things. None of that's IT, but IT certainly enables that. Then in our mission, we want to be innovative. We want to make sure that we're providing the tools to enable that mission. So, the aspirational goal is to be a leader in the OIG community. And then, we developed our goals from there and our sub goals. And, we made sure that they're all measurable. How can I measure these things? So very important. So, and then we adopted values, of course, being customer focused, mission driven. We want to provide quality and reliability. We want to make sure that we use our investments to the max. What do we have? Can we leverage it more? Sometimes you get these tools and they're great and those the shiny objects, but sometimes you only end up using 10%. Well, let's use more of a percentage of that. So really looking at that, being cloud smart, not just cloud first, but cloud smart. Working together, a lot of silos I found in the organization that we're working to break down. So, we adopted this. So we presented this strategic plan, and then the other aspect rolls into communications. It's like, okay, we've developed a strategic plan, and if you read our strategic plan, all right, techies kind of understand it, technical savvy people, but what about our customers? How do we, communicate the value of how our strategic plan helps with our customers? So we've developed basically a one-pager for our customers. And, our focus is to manage IT as a business. That's kind of the motto. Not be a mom and pop shop, but kind of mature around these things, manage the budget, not just track budget, a lot of maturity around communications. And this was one of our things in communications. How do we market ourselves? How do we tell people we're here to help you? We're here to make things better. We're here to better enable your mission and make you more efficient. So we wanted to let them know what our values are. And of course, we put purposely on top, we want to be customer focused and mission driven. And then we explain in our best terms, of course, some of the things that we're revolving around to deliver to that user community, so they know what the IT shop is focused on and wanting to deliver, and they get a better understanding of what our purpose is and where our focus is for them. So that goes into a larger strategy of communications. So we've started, one of the things that we're doing is we found out, communications, a lot of talk, a lot of people are talking, but just I found in some places not effectively, talking past each other. Things were getting escalated to me. This isn't working. We need help with this. And it's just like people weren't necessarily talking. So like I said, go back to basics. Don't overcomplicate things. Communication is 3 parts: the sender, the receiver, and the feedback. And sometimes people weren't listening to the feedback. They'd send or they'd receive and they didn't get the feedback or interpret the feedback properly. So that's what I was finding, is a lot of people weren't communicating, or they didn't understand. Like we were sending out messages like the flux capacitor, if you're not going 88 miles an hour with your laptop in your car, may crash and you have to hold it upside down. Just communications that the normal end user would not understand. It's like, I don't care. I just want my stuff to work. So we've started doing a total inventory of all the ways we communicate. North, south, east, west, up, down, inside out, outside in, and looking at what is good, what is bad, what do we want to get rid of, what do we need to improve on, where are our gaps? Because it's part of the branding, it's part of having the common voice, it's part of getting your folks on the same page. So that's internally as well, our communications, as well as externally, getting our folks to understand how we talk, how we appear to them. Why do they want to come to the IT office? How can we help? How can we better communicate? How can we better help them understand? Like when we're working on Modernize something, you can't just put IT out there and magically it will work for them. No, you have to understand their business processes. When you're modernizing, there's opportunities there. So sometimes They don't understand their processes and things like that. So helping guide them, but we would talk very IT to them, and it would kind of go over their heads, and they think they need to know about the technology. No, really need to know about the business processes. So approach differently how we talk to folks. So one big thing I would say in our journey, that we've done is a lot of the background work, how your organization runs, how your organization communicates, that makes the other things a lot easier. Um, like I said, some of it's not rocket science. There are some good frameworks. I'm not saying, those aren't good things, but sometimes it's just getting back to the basics and looking at how you communicate, the different audiences you communicate, what are the different mediums you use. Like we're sending out a newsletter now, and that's actually drawing in a lot of our user community to understand who we are. It kind of humanizes us. We put in like a highlight of one of the employees in the OCIO's office, and kind of like what's their favorite color, how many dogs they have, kind of humanizes them as well, because people call the help desk, and the help desk is one of those places that you usually get the front line of and the unhappiness when you get the surveys and stuff. But sending out newsletters highlighting employees, and the good job that they do, and what are their interests and things. We've kind of helped start humanizing, so that our users understand that there's another human on this end, and we're doing the best we can to deliver the services that they need. So like I said, I like the KISS principle, keep it simple. I know my chemistry teacher in high school used to say, keep it simple, stupid. He used the other S, but I just say, keep it simple. And definitely, we are looking at adopting frameworks and a lot of the maturity, but I think some of that back office maturity definitely helps you deliver better. If you get a chance, we just did an exercise as well. We had a facilitator come in on a culture change. And the funny thing is, being here the first 6 months, a lot of observation, a lot of taking note. What is the culture like? How do people react? How are people working? How are people communicating internally? How are they prioritizing the work? What do they seem to, how do they work? What and things like, just observing everything. We did this culture workshop, and I would talk with my CTO when we'd be bouncing a lot of ideas off each other for during those first 6 months. These are my observations. What do you think? And this, what we had about 20 people in our culture exercise, and it was kind of, had a little format. It's like, what do you like? What would you like to change on, next Monday? What do you want to start coming in and changing? And it was interesting that just about everything that myself and the CTO have been talking about and putting on the list to address at some point, whether that be communications, organization, the way we manage and prioritize, all came out from the employees. Yeah, communications, we see the newsletter, and I think we got to look at all of our communications and communicate more strategically. The better way of managing projects, the better way to prioritize, all these things they came up with themselves. So now they match up with the list that we were already talking about. Now you can recruit them to be part of the solution, not just not part of the problem, but be part of the solution. Why? Because they have identified it. So now we can, turn that into making it theirs. That culture workshop, we have the output from that, and we're tracking it, and we're going to aggressively and keep pegging away at those list of things, because they're all very valid and they're all something that the employee wants. So definitely something that we're looking at. So sometimes it's good to take a breath, take a step back, and make the observations and look at different ways to engage. Can't boil the ocean, but sometimes some of those back office things or the internal things you do helps make you be able to deliver all the things that we're going to be talking about over the next few hours, easier for your organization to deliver to your mission and your customer. So with that, I think I'm just about at my 15 minutes, and I will turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Wow, I love that, Jerry. Thank you so much. And while I have you here, is it okay if we pivot a little bit and talk about the work that you're doing with our working groups at ATARC briefly?
Oh, when you say pivot, I think of my old basketball days. Yes.
I think of Ross from Friends. If you
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you just want me to talk about what we're doing?
Yeah, I was just gonna, ask you a few questions about your involvement in ATARC's working
Yep.
groups and specifically the value that you see as a federal CIO. So
Yes.
maybe you could speak a little bit more about the working group you're most active in and what the audience, can get an idea of what it is that you guys have been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I've chaired, this would be my second working group that I've done with ATARC, chaired with ATARC. I did TIC 3.0 initially, and now I'm doing zero trust. I am a big zero trust advocate, influencer, evangelist, what have you. Also on the CIO's Innovation Council working group for zero trust, co-chaired that along with Sylvia Burns at FDIC. So very much involved, certified and everything. So I was very happy to get involved with ATARC. Like I said, started with TIC 3.0. We had a pretty good working group there, and we kind of had the format of, all right, let's define it. So we took the DHS, new guidance from DHS, and then we kind of mapped out use cases and things like that. And then the vendors participating alongside with the government, which is a great thing about ATARC, because we put these things live in a lab, and they were demonstrated them against the use cases. If I wanted to do a POC in the government, there's some hoops to go through, but by doing it under the nonprofit, the direct access and the interaction with the government and the vendors is awesome. Chatham House rules. When we were defining things like the zero trust and the TIC requirements and use cases, doesn't matter, if you're a vendor or government. We did do the zero trust a little differently, because we found out when we started zero trust, there was all kinds of different definitions from our government folks. So what we did initially was we had two tracks. We had a government, and then we had the vendors. The government, let's level set on what zero trust is. Let's make sure we understand we're all on the same page. And then we kind of started feeding that every other week to the vendors. Here's what we have, here's what we're thinking about. And so the vendors could start thinking on those terms. And then we merged the groups. Once we exhausted all the output from the government, we kind of did, sections like we did identity, we do governance and automation, and we delivered those to the vendors. Then we came up with use cases and an outline for the vendors to follow. We ended up with zero trust. We ended up with an enormous amount of participation of 54 vendors. And they are taking that outline in those use cases and architecture use cases as well. We have architecture use cases, and we have functional use cases. We have functional capabilities that they cover, because no one tool or no one vendor does all of zero trust that I know of. So we ask them what their functional capabilities are. So we have a functional capabilities model. And then what they are doing is they are using that, and they are using that outline to do their presentations. And every Friday, we have at minimum two presentations from our vendors. And through all 54 vendors are getting about 75 minutes, I think it is, to present against their outline. They've created their labs. Some of them are in the cloud. Some of them have built out in the lab space that is provided to them from their own sweat equity. And they're all recorded. They're put on the ATARC YouTube channel. So if you want to see any of the ones that have already happened or you missed them, you can subscribe to that. And once we get through all 54, which will take us a little, another month or so, what we're going to do is we're going to have a pause, a little review, redefine, make sure we look back at where we started. Here's what we defined, here's what we've seen. And then we have, I think, some vendors actually already done some integrations. Like we have one that has done it with 3 tools. So we've looking at them in silos, but we all know that we're going to have to integrate. So we are going to bring in a few to present integration examples. I'm not going to say that these are the be all end all. Some of them are, maybe get that 75, 25. They get 75 of the way there. But it's just some examples, so the audience can see what integrations are starting to look like, especially during these preliminary times. So really excited about this working group. Like I said, it's great for the vendors, because the vendors are hitting a lot of government agencies at once. not having, they do a lot of hitting the streets one at a time, presenting the same thing over and over. But, they're able to do it once to a larger audience that gets a majority of the, the baseline use cases that we all have, as well as for the government. It's a way for us to interact directly through ATARC and engage on this. And I think influence and help provide output to some of the other government agencies and working groups as well. So it's been a very positive experience, and I've always appreciated, the Kirstens and the Alyssas and the Hannahs that help support our working groups. So thank you, and I always enjoy these sessions as well. Anything else?
No, that was perfect. Thank you. And so for folks at home who aren't aware, you can get involved with our working groups, and you can attend these sessions on Friday. Like Jerry mentioned, just reach out to ATARC, reach out to me, reach out to Alyssa. We'll put you in touch with the right person.
Yeah, so. I think you put on the ATARC site, you'll see Zero Trust there, and who's coming up for that Friday will be updated. So if you can check there every week and say, oh, there's one that I'm interested in, or like I said, on the YouTube channel, you can see past ones.
Yep.
Sorry.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry. We really appreciate it as always. And we are just ready now for our panel discussion. So if our moderator, Melissa Harris, would like to come on camera, and Melissa, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kirsten. Before we begin, I just wanted to encourage the audience to submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of the Zoom platform. We'll be going through them throughout the session, so please send them in as we go. Please also remember to answer the poll questions that we'll be asking throughout the session as well to get your CPE credits. So now I would like to introduce our panelists, so please give a wave when I call your name. Still with us from the keynote, just now is Jerry Karen, the HHS OIG CIO and Assistant IG for IT. We also have OPM CIO Guy Cavallo and Zimperium Public Sector VP Jim Kovac. So thank you all for being here to talk about the Zero Trust Executive Order and OMB mandates. With that being said, would each of you like to start by giving a quick introduction and what the cybersecurity EO means for your organizations, either from that CIO or industry perspective? Jerry, since you just finished up your keynote and gave that overview, would you like to kick things off?
I've never read it, so I don't know what you're talking about. No, my name's Gerald Karen. In case you missed it, I am the CIO for the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. Previous to that, I was at the Department of State as the Director for Enterprise Network Management, where I did the infrastructure for the department. As regards to the executive order, I was very excited to see the executive order. I think it does a great thing, as a lot of us have discussed, I think, in the circles I'm in, at least, it was always an IT problem, cybersecurity and things. And I think that brought to light that no, it's an agency, it's got to be taken on at the highest levels of the agency and understood that it needs to be prioritized. I think it also, I could go on for the whole session, but one of the other things that I'd say, that I think positively about, I think it moves us from, in my opinion, I think we're very compliant, been over the years, very compliance focused, and we've used compliance to kind of measure. And I think it moves us to be more effective at cybersecurity. And I think that's an underlying emphasis that I think the EO is meant to do, is move us to be more effective, which is very different than just being compliant. So there's more I could say, but I'll pass it along.
Very true. Guy, would you like to take on the next one?
Sure, thank you, and welcome to all the attendees today. So I'm Guy Cavallo. I've been the CIO at OPM for about 7 months after joining OPM about 15 months ago as principal deputy CIO. And then when Claire was named Federal CIO, I moved up to acting. I have about a 20-year career in the federal government, but it's taken me many decades to do that because I keep moving back to the private sector. So I actually took a 17-year gap in my federal experience before I came back to the federal government. And the thing I liked about the Cyber Executive Order is that, when I came back after that big break, some things changed radically, some things went backwards. And one thing I think that having executive orders like this really helps do is provide the guidance and reinforcement to the CIOs to help them make these type of decisions where in the past there might be resistance that the CIO is going out on a limb by himself or herself to make things harder for all the employees. So zero trust, the use of the cloud, multi-factor, those are things that I implemented in my previous job at OPM, and I'm sorry, at SBA. And we are well on our way to doing those and many other cyber updates at OPM. So getting the executive order just provided additional reinforcement on the path we were headed.
Excellent. And Jim?
Yeah, hi, good morning. Thanks for having me today. Jim Kovach. I am the public sector leader for Zimperium. For those who are not familiar with Zimperium, we specialize in mobile security. Very briefly, as a little bit of a use case to describe that a little bit more, since we're all opening back up again and traveling these days in particular, perhaps when you get to the airport, you get that little notification, hey, free Wi-Fi, let me connect here. Don't probably want to do that unless you have threat detection on your device. That's something that we protect you against. Once you get to the airport and you want to download an application that you might think is benign and safe, perhaps it's a lifestyle app that you've been looking to check out, probably don't want to do that unless you have protection on your device, as those apps can actually be loaded with all sorts of malware or harmful content. And then once you get to the airport and make it through all that and get closer to your terminal, you recognize, since you've been now away from your home for about 30 minutes, your mobile device needs to be charged. At least my last phone did. And so you would venture over to the USB charging station and plug in there. Note to everyone, do not do that. Those USB charging stations have been spoofed before, so it's always best to use the electrical outlet. Threat detection protects you from that. And then lastly, as you're getting in line to board your plane, you get that all-important text message that says your medications have arrived, they're at your doorstep, oh my gosh, check on it, and you go to click on that link. Don't do that either. Those text messaging, those smishing or phishing attacks can also cause a lot of harm as well. So that's what we do in terms of mobile security. With regards to the executive order, I'm most interested in seeing how much funding Jerry and Guy are going to get as part of it in fiscal year 22. Otherwise, it's obviously loaded with solid content and guidance, and look forward to the discussion about that.
Fantastic.
Just caused me to throw my phone away.
No, it's like you have to think about securing your phone at the airport now as much as like holding on your passport. So thanks for those tips. That's important.
Yep.
So diving right in, how are you each navigating the cyber EO and OMB mandates around zero trust and security? And, Guy, you were mentioning how it's important that you're getting this overall guidance, but what does successful implementation of the EO look like in your perspective?
Oh, sure. Thank you for that question. Like Jim said, it's nice to have the money come to us, which we're still waiting for, to do all of these things. What I found with this and with any executive order, you're either already doing it or you're not doing it. But in any event, the way you're reporting what you're doing needs to be in a different format. So what I did is I pulled together a senior leadership team, because this not only talks about CIO functions, it talks about procurements and things outside of the CIO jurisdiction, and made sure that we had an executive leader assigned to each major area. And then we had to come up with our reporting format on how we would get back that information. Something very important is that with any executive order, there are always deadlines, and you want to make sure that you meet the deadlines, even if your answer is we're not ready yet. I've seen a number of agencies just miss deadlines, which then causes additional angst for everybody in the process, because at the OMB level, they're not getting the full picture of the federal government, and at the agency level, maybe you didn't have the right resources with it. So I think having the right executives in charge of it, making sure that you've mapped out each one of the requirements. Listen, some executive orders are much more specific in a single focus area. This one was very broad. So I needed to make sure I had people working in each area, and then to make sure we're hitting the reporting deadlines back. Like I highlighted earlier, I was already well on my way to implementing a number of these newer technologies like the secure cloud and cyber logging in the cloud. So to me, it was like, yes, okay, more validation that we're headed on the right path.
Fantastic. And what about you, Jerry?
So similar to Guy, before the executive order already came out, we were already on our, already introducing the zero trust journey here. Took the architecture that I developed while I was at state and brought it over here, started educating, and then of course the executive order came out a bit after my arrival over here. So already was on that path. So it was good validation and justification of what we were already setting out to do. The difference, I think, one difference I have than what I think that Guy has is I'm considered a component of a larger agency. Therefore, I report up through that, the parent agency, so to speak. But, I have, being the OIG, we are wholly separate because, for conflict of interest purposes and things, the nature of the work that we do, wholly responsible for are the IT of the OIG shop. So therefore, taking the path that we need to the executive order. So, especially, the emphasis around, the executive order has other things, but the emphasis around zero trust, doing the maturity, this DHS came up with the maturity model, which was very useful. I had our own functional capabilities model, took the maturity model, looked at the investments that we had already made, because I want to make use of those as best I can. Or see if they're the right things that I want to keep or use. What is our maturity there? Where do we need to work? And now what we're doing is we're drawing out that roadmap of what our zero trust journey is going to look like. And I think the executive order, and I think they know that it is going to be a journey. It's not going to be something that is going to be done this year. It is an architecture. It is the long game when you're approaching it. So we're drawing out our own roadmap, and we'll collaborate with our parent agency and help where needed. There's a lot of good collaboration working groups, ATARC being just one of those as well. And we have prepared and are pushing up a submission to get technology modernization funds as well to help us on our journey. That will help probably speed things up. However, even if not, we're still going to push forward. It just might be a little slower than we would like, but the Technology Modernization Fund opportunity is there, so we are looking to pursue that. So hopefully we can get through that process, which I hear is an excellent process. I think I'd throw it back over to Guy. I think they've gone through it there successfully, being one of the first 7 awarded. Yes. So yeah, so congratulations to them. They've gone through the process, and I know James Saunders, that works in OPM as well, has been on our ATARC working group as well, and found benefit from some of the work that we've done that was able to help, he said. So so we are doing some good things that can help in like the working group that we have. So
yeah, if I could just jump in on that real quick. Yeah, Jerry, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, we had requested the TMF funding before the executive order came out, which is one reason why we got there ahead of the rush of everybody else. Because like you, I'd implemented Zero Trust at my previous agency, and then brought that along with James Saunders, who helped me do that at SBA, over to OPM. So, when Jim talked about the extra cash coming in, that's one part of this where, by getting TMF funding, I do have, which I still have to repay, but I at least have money to get started.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to see how the TMF has become such a resource for helping agencies meet these goals. And I'll get around to funding later on, but I also wanted to let Jim chime in about the EO more.
I think from an industry perspective, obviously a lot of us are aligning to those various zero trust pillars. As Jerry mentioned earlier, not a single vendor can possibly do it all. And so from the industry standpoint, it's where do you align and where is your value proposition relative to the zero trust architecture, the maturity model, and then what the organizations and agencies are doing with regards to that. So I think you'll see, as you have seen, much of the industry start to make sure that their value prop aligns to the zero trust and the broader executive order.
Fantastic. So I just want to take a moment here to pause for a first poll question. It seems like a great time to bring this up given where the conversation is right now. So Alyssa, if you can pull that up for the audience. Give everyone a moment here. All right. Well, it looks like everyone, not everyone, but most folks here have heard about the EO and also have been looking to implement, at least, you know, if not fully implement, at least they've started. So that's a great start. All right, so just to continue the conversation, you know, obviously, we were just talking about funding here, and that is one challenge at all times for everyone, but there are also lots of other challenges in meeting the EO's mandates. It's very broad, as Guy was talking about. So what have been some of the ways that you've been navigating those challenges, especially when there are so many requirements that have come down the pipe for you to meet? Jerry, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we here get our money a little differently than most, I think. So it makes it a little more interesting. One of the things I find, and I've experienced this before, is, you know, there's the modernization project, you know, and people are looking to modernize, and, you know, they're wanting to produce this great output and solution for their customer. And then, you know, they do all the engineering, and guess what? Then they go to the security people. And then it's like, all right, now let's figure out how to do the security part. And so that's not gonna fly and here for me. So, you know, kind of getting, no, security needs to be thought up front. Security needs to be baked in. Here's our architecture. Here's our concepts. Here's where we're going. And, you know, start it from the beginning. So definitely, it's not, security cannot be an afterthought. So that includes the funding, right? The total cost of ownership of doing the project. So getting that concept of, you know, not doing the budgeting in silos. So we're doing introducing, at least here, some maturity around the planning. You know, it's hard because, you know, we do have these 2-year budget cycles. You know, exactly what I'm going to do in 2 years, what I tell you today is not going to probably be what I'm probably exactly doing 2 years from now. But you have kind of a concept and an idea and a multi-year roadmap. But of course, you know, we're doing some activities to bring everybody together, you know, to understand where the dependencies are for some of the projects that we're doing. What are the resource needs? What are the impacts if we don't do it? Where is the prioritization? You know, if you're doing a modernization project, include the security aspects of it. And understanding what that total cost of ownership is very important. And breaking down those silos so you truly know what the cost is. And estimates, and it helps you, you know, make the better justifications to go up should you need more funding as well. We also track our unfunded requests, you know, all the work that we've, you know, we kind of do zero-based budgeting, whereas forget where the constraints are and where the budget line is or what that budget number is. What's all the work that we see on our plate? And then we add the constraints, and, you know, you draw the line, all right, based on budget and resources, this is what we can do, but we're also tracking our unfunded requests and prioritizing that. So If there's an opportunity, we know exactly what we can jump on because we can go to that list and address it, because it's still work that we've identified that we have needs for. So we still track even unfunded requests in the if the opportunity arises.
Thank you for that. And Guy.
Yeah, definitely. The TMF is one source of funding, but that won't solve everybody's cyber needs, especially with the breadth of the executive order. Something that I've done, and OPM is my third agency now that I've led to the cloud, and that I've learned and exercised in all three of those opportunities, is you either do it or you don't. And each time I've been able in a fiscal year to make major cloud steps and work with the CFO to request that if I save money on a particular on-premise contract that I'm now replacing with the cloud, can I keep that money in my budget and reinvest it in the cloud? And if you allow me to do that, I won't be coming to you with my handout. So people have described that as burning the bridge behind us once we cross the bridge. When you do this, you are in. You can't just put your foot in the water and then still keep your on-premise costs going. So I've used that model successfully multiple times now to help pay for these additional things. The other thing is sometimes for some of these mandates, we need to change our staffing levels or change our contract requirements and the skills that we're looking for. So we're also doing those on the fly because again, this isn't everything in the executive order isn't just something that you can buy. It requires your staff and contract resources to be able to execute and leverage what you're using. And again, my experience is the more I take my cybersecurity requirements to native cloud secure services, the lower my cost is, yet the better my visibility is. So it's a win-win across the board. Will I be able to do everything in a single fiscal year that's in this very extensive executive order? I'm going to try, but there's a lot there, and people need to remember. I mean, a few years ago, OPM was going to go away and be merged into other agencies. So, to pick up, so that meant that vacancies went on field. Contracts were allowed to expire. There was a lot of work just to get us back on our feet. But we're making great progress on each of these initiatives.
Thank you for sharing that. And Jim, from the industry perspective, you definitely have your own role there. So would you like to go into what challenges you've seen and maybe how you're trying to navigate it?
Yeah, look, navigating the budget cycle of the federal government is always something that's a monumental task for all of us, including the government folks as well as industry. But if I had one suggestion, it would be make friends with the folks who control the purse strings. Have a nice relationship with your oversight committees, the staffers on the Hill, and make sure that you're advocating for yourself and aligned with the executive order and all the things that again, compliance and mandates come with, because mandates without funding are mandates without funding. And so again, advocate for yourselves and create those good and solid and friendly relationships with the folks on the Hill who control those budgets.
Gotcha. Before we continue, I see that an audience question has popped up. So I wanted to throw it to the panelists here. And that question is, how do you address change management concerns for processes that affect end users? And this includes stuff like multi-factor authentication or mobile device management. Whoever wants it.
I can go first on that one. Because I am a change agent, I know I can't just come in like an elephant in a china shop with an organization that I need to bring everybody along with me. So in each place, I bring in a change management team to work with our communications, to work with our processes, to really reinforce with the customers. We're making this change not because Guy wants to do it, but it's the right thing to do. And especially when there's an executive order that comes out for that change, it helps reinforce it. But I think communicating, we do all types of focus sessions, training sessions. One thing that we did at OPM that was really successful is that we set up we set up a customer success team and asked for volunteers across the organization so that they could take my staff and expand it. But instead of being an OCIO employee, it's actually someone in the H&I or the retirement office that's saying, hey, you know, we need to do this and I'll help train you with it. So if you leave that part out, you will fail. I mean, change has been stopped by many people because it's been forced down their throat and not properly vetted. So involving them early in the process, having them understand why we're making the change. And like I said, I even have a full change management team because of the amount of change that we're doing. And the feedback from having my customer service teams out there has been really, really positive.
Fantastic. Does anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, you know, much like Guy, totally agree. Change management is a very important aspect. And you know, even like just an example for our zero trust journey, you know, we got a lot of foundational things we need to do. Some of these things would not affect the end user necessarily. Some of the back office things that the CIO needs to set up as foundational things. However, knowing that zero trust is coming, you know, and you know, what the heck does that mean to an end user? So you know, we started presenting, you know, did a tailored presentation on zero trust because it's going to start coming up within the next year or so for our end users. So put together a presentation and presented it to all of the agency here. This is zero trust. This is what it means to you. Here's some of the advantages you're going to get from it as well. You know, single sign-on. You know, we're looking at things like not, you know, having to hairpin you back to an on-premise, but still getting the security that we need to do, but going more directly to where you need to be able to go. But you know, so better efficiency, possibly better performance, other things. How can you contribute? What do we need from them? I'm recruiting them through this communication. They got to be part of my team. It's not just an IT thing. I need to know how they work. What is the data that they're accessing? What do they like? You know, what is their normal personas day to day? You know, how would they like to work? Not how they work, but how would they rather like to work? You know, so we can understand and we can make, as we're doing this, we can include those requirements or those requests and make it seamless for them and a lot more acceptable because why we've taken in their feedback in. So I'm recruiting them as part of our zero trust team, for example, by starting communications early so we can start learning from them, you know, where their data is, what's important to them on a day-to-day basis. Do they access it mobilely? Do they access it, you know, in the office? You know, what other means do they have? Things like that. So definitely, I think communications is a big part of that change management, I think, as Guy said. So taking steps towards that as well.
Certainly.
I would just offer from an end user perspective, walk a mile in the other person's shoes. And I think both Jerry and Guy touched on it. What's in it for them and present it in such a way that, hey, we're going to extend this capability so that you can benefit in the following ways. And this is why we're asking for your support and your participation in adopting multi-factor auth. It's, you know, and some of the other policy changes that might have to occur. In the context of bring your own device as an example, which is being talked about a lot lately, in order to enable that so that you don't maybe need to have to carry multiple devices, fantastic, but we might need you to do a few things to your device to make it a little bit more secure as an example. So what's in it for them, you know, having their interest in mind.
Gotcha. So we talked a little bit about change management just there, and there are all sorts of different aspects that you need to consider when you're adopting these mandates from the executive order. So can we take a moment to share some best practices or lessons learned that you've realized, and maybe some tips for agencies trying to implement zero trust, given challenges like legacy IT infrastructure or limited budgets? Guy, do we want to start with you?
Sure. I think the panel, we hit on a number of these items. One, when we implemented zero trust at SBA, we sold it to the end users as traditionally when you're working at home with your VPN, you have to click on like 8 different things before you can do anything. And with zero trust, we took it down to put in your PIV card, enter your PIN, and you're in, and that you only have to do that once for the week. The end users loved it. my cyber team, and I loved it because we now had secure connectivity full time for every end user. And then when SBA expanded fourfold to deal with the CARES Act, I was very thankful that we had Zero Trust implemented as a remote connectivity connection versus traditional VPN. So I think selling it, everyone understands the importance of protecting data in the federal government, but if we can sell it in a way that we're making your job easier, you know, like Jim and Jerry both had highlighted, what's important to them, and you know, really show them that they're helping us execute these types of services. Again, to me, the move to the cloud and being able to quickly stand up new functionality, such as with the COVID attestation requirements that came out very quickly, you know, in earlier directives. You know, we did that with a cloud service in a day, where traditional waiting to find a server, do I have space for it? Can I get these, you know, can I make enough developers available for it? I think leveraging all those capabilities, and by being in our cloud instant, it already had the security in place. I think all of those combined make executing this much easier.
Right. Jerry.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the points that guys already made, so I won't rehash all of those because they're all excellent points that I would echo. One of the other things is, you know, very powerful is, you know, creating a lot of visuals to communicate not only to our end users as we've highlighted already, but also our management. You know, I got a very telling one slide, you know, that shows some of all the functions that will contribute to Zero Trust and where our maturity is in each of those, color coded, you know, green, yellow, red, you know, something easy to understand. And it kind of helps tell that story. It's like, we got some work to do. We need some support. We need you to help prioritize this for the organization, which the EO helps as well by leveraging that and referencing it. So there's some good ways to communicate, you know, in all different aspects, from our customers to it's not just a CIO thing, to our CFOs, you know, to help justify the funding, the impacts if we don't execute some of these things, but also leveraging what we already have, as Guy was talking about, and improving on it, or, you know, taking the good. How can we better integrate and eliminate some of our silos? So we're looking at doing a lot of those foundational things. That's going to set us up on a very good path. So it will be like going downhill from after we get some of the major things done, hopefully.
All right. Jim, did you want to add anything?
I would just say that a lot of the best practices, references, and resources are widely available on the ATARC website. So please feel free to visit there, and you'll find some good best practices documents as well.
Fantastic. We have more audience questions to get to before the session's over, but we need to jump to our next poll question. So Alyssa, if you want to pull that up for us. Good question about where we go here for the future of work. Okay, lots of uncertainty, but you know, we have to navigate those times regardless. So thank you everyone for answering that question. So another good question here is about CDM, which has been around for quite a while. So what role will CDM have in securing federal systems going forward?
That's one of my favorite subjects, so I'll jump on that one first. When Maria Rote and I were at SBA and we moved to the cloud, and the CDM mandate was there, and we saw that we were struggling with it. When we looked into it, the initial design was all for on-premise environments and wasn't prepared to deal with cloud environments where a server can be there for an hour and then disappear when you're trying to tag everything. So we went back to DHS and OMB and said, we'd like to do a pilot and show that there are other ways to meet the objectives without following this specific architecture. And so we did a 90-day pilot and showed and proved the point that native cloud cybersecurity services could meet all the objectives without doing that. So we helped shape the new CDM policies. I think what we're seeing with the executive orders is that CDM is kind of being pulled apart a little bit, but I think what's important for CDM or these executive orders is that they not be dictated architecture because every agency is at a different place, but they give us, you need to get to this level of security and allow us to propose back a way to do it like we did at SBA using cloud services versus the on-premises tools. So I think there's still a future, but I think it's more in aligning to the objectives than having a prescriptive architecture.
Certainly. Thanks for that insight.
Guy said it more eloquently than I would put it, actually. I come from Department of State, and if anybody doesn't know, it was a bunch of people from the Department of State that went over to DHS and created the CDM program, kind of where it births. Well, my shop, actually, when I was at Department of State, kind of had the grandfather, where we worked with the Information Assurance Office at the time and developed this little thing called iPost, and that's kind of what birthed the CDM program. I was also had the opportunity to go over to SBA and see the presentation on how they were doing CDM, and kind of justified kind of my voice when I was back at the Department of State about the CDM program. And I always said this, and agreeing with a lot of, Guy says about, the program has to reinvent itself in a way, I'll say. But I always said that it's a subset of your overall requirements. So DHS has certain things that they want to accomplish, but you got to look at your overall requirements and how you can leverage it best for your organization. So it's a subset. You need to do these things. DHS wants you to do these things, but you don't bring in those tools just to satisfy that. For instance, how can I leverage that as well? Because I need to be able to sustain it at the end of the day. I have limited resources, and I want to get value out of the program, not just give value to somebody else. So definitely look at it in that way. Just remember, my opinion is it does need to revamp. I think there's some good thoughts when it first came out. But with the technology in the cloud changing, definitely needs to be revamped. But when you do look at the program, remember, I always say it's a subset of your overall requirements, and look at it that way.
Thanks. Jim, did you want to add anything about CDM?
There's a roadmap, I think, that's been published, and Richard Grabowski has talked about kind of the direction of CDM. So I know those resources are out there, but I'll just, again, amplify the fact that to the extent that the agencies communicate with the CDM PMO and advocate to what Jerry was just talking about, your requirements, initiate the RFSs, the request for services, and then certainly to the extent CDM shows up with some dollars, I know that the agencies would be welcoming that.
Great. Looks like we have about time for one more question from the audience here. So I'm going to take this one that asks that about other aspects of the EO beyond zero trust. So what other areas, I know supply chain is another really big one that we haven't touched on today, but what areas of the EO jump out to you as some of the most impactful for your agencies? Jerry?
Yeah, the mute button's a challenge sometimes. I think one of the aspects that I'll highlight, there's the encryption requirement. The other one I think is the multi-factor authentication one that is in there. I know I went to it was an event up in Baltimore. It was strange to go to an in-person event or conference, but the DISA general was talking about beyond PIV. And I think a multi-factor authentication and talking about that is something that is in the EO. I think it's a very strong thing that people need to look at, how we do authentication and making sure that we have strong authentication, because as we move to the cloud and new technologies, there is the proliferation of digital identities. And I think a lot of these things do tie back to zero trust in one form or fashion. It's very important to have strong authentication so we can best proof who somebody is. Not have to give a blood sample every time they want to log in to check their DNA, but we need to do best proofing. So, the PIV card has been around for a while. It's probably one of the least risky, but probably not the foolproof way. So I think there's looking at different technologies to help. I think CISA is also talking a bit about the authentication and authentication. I don't want to butcher it, but anti-phishing ways to authenticate that prevents against phishing and things like that. So I think there's going to be some additional guidance coming out around that. I don't know if it's going to be prescriptive or recommended kind of guidance, but I think we'll see more around some of these because they're singing the executive order, but I think we're still awaiting some guidance and some information that can help us on these things. So I would expect to look and just reach out. I mean, there's a lot of working groups, there's a lot of networking people involved, so reach out and utilize your resources to work with others.
Great. Before we head out and pass the session over, Guy and Jim, I wanted to give you a chance to comment.
Sure, I'll keep mine simple. Yeah, I mean, there's no part of the executive order on cyber that is less important than the rest. I mean, taken together, they are all huge. But I mean, to me, focusing on leveraging the cloud, which also allows me to hit the cyber event requirements and the endpoint protection monitoring and zero trust, they all tie together with it. I'd say my word of advice to anybody is if you haven't changed the way you're doing cyber from 5 years ago, you really need to read this executive order and change. You cannot answer most of the requirements today with what you used to do. You have to change.
Yeah, and I would just say one call out is the logging requirements, which I think is amplified in OMB 2131. So specifically relative to the executive order are a fairly detailed set of logging requirements. And then per what Guy and Jerry just mentioned, the other aspect of identity is device attestation, right? And making sure that Jerry is who Jerry says he is, and we validate that. But Jerry's devices, not just mobile, his laptop, et cetera, but certainly his mobile device needs to be attested that it is also free from harmful malware or other threats to the enterprise before we let him in. Otherwise, all we've done is say, great, now we know Jerry did it in terms of, if something bad happens if we don't do that device attestation. Exactly, there you go, Jerry. So we know where to go when things go wrong, but let's try not to, get to that point.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining us for this panel. It's been wonderful chatting with all of you. So thank you to the panelists again and ATARC for having us. And I'd like to pass the program over for the next session.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa and panelists. Up next, we have our emerging technology talk, our first one of the day. This time we will be hearing from VP of Security over at Anchor, Josh Bressers. Josh, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. All right, I will share my screen here. All right, and today we're going to talk about supply chain security. We'll kind of shift a little bit from the last discussion, and specifically we'll focus on the concept of software bill of materials and the executive order, and we'll even tie in a little bit of Log4j, which is a topic we've all, we'll say, become extremely familiar with over the last couple of weeks and months as it's gone. So I'll start here with a graph we have from a report Anchor did. We have it just came out. It's our 2022 software supply chain security report. And the interesting part about this is we asked all of our, I guess we sent it out to a number of organizations and leadership specifically, asking them, have you been affected by a software supply chain incident? And 62% said yes. And some of this was done before Log4j, some of it was done after Log4j. And so we don't exactly know if Log4j has changed this drastically, but you get the idea, right? This is not an uncommon problem that people are seeing in the industry. So kind of what does that mean, right? We'll start talking about the supply chain and what does that look like? And it can be difficult sometimes for us to understand how software is built in the modern world. And where we have software consumer on the right side, that can be you're getting COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software. It could be something you're developing in-house. Who knows where this is coming from, right? But obviously something is built or acquired and it's built from parts. And this is no different than any manufacturing process that exists on the planet today, where every part is built from other parts, and it kind of goes all the way down. And so if we think about we'll put it in the context of kind of Log4j, where you can have a piece of software that doesn't necessarily look like you're including it specifically, but it can be included somewhere down in your supply chain because everything is built from everything else. And this is true of commercial software, it's true of open source, it's true of literally everything. Everything is built from something else. Everything has a supply chain, and it can be tricky for us to understand where is this stuff coming from? How does it work? And it is often difficult to understand what is in the software we have. And this is kind of where this whole concept of software bill of materials comes from. And it's something that's called out in the executive order specifically. The EO, as was mentioned during the last panel, it contains a lot of stuff. It's very broad. And one of the topics is software bill of materials specifically. It literally calls out SBOMs. And this is really, I'm excited about this because I come from a software world. And so building software is a big deal. And what's in it, I think we've had a lot of open source historically being included in our software, and we don't always know it. And I think we haven't had a good view into that for a long time. And so this is a huge opportunity for us now to actually have some light shown onto this. And again, we have a graph from our report that came out, and 76% of the individuals we surveyed plan to increase software bill of materials use. And I think this is no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention. Software bill of materials is become a very, I guess, sought after topic as of late. It's getting all this attention, and I think the executive order just helped propel it along. Like, supply chain is a big deal, and it's something we all have to think about. It's not something you can push off onto someone else. And this brings us to kind of the concept. This graph is full of SBOMs, and that's on purpose, right? This is the same one we just looked at where we were talking about vulnerabilities, but in this particular context, it's to show what an actual software bill of materials included in your supply chain is supposed to look like. There are a lot of SBOMs in anything that gets built. You can think of, there's going to be like the one SBOM in maybe the application you receive or build, but then all of those parts before that also include an SBOM. And things like open source provide us some unique opportunities and challenges, because in the open source world, you can't necessarily go to an open source project and demand an SBOM because it's an open source project. That's not how that works. You can go to a vendor and demand an SBOM from a vendor, and they obviously are going to comply with you. But from the perspective of open source, no dice. If they say, no, I don't want to, well, that's the way it is. And so this puts us in a position now where, as maybe a consumer of open source, or maybe a vendor who's using open source in our product, it is our responsibility to create some of these SBOMs and to understand what's in the open source and what pieces of open source we're using, in fact. And so there are solutions, which makes me excited. And then we'll tie this all together now with Log4j, right? So we understand we have a supply chain. We understand we want SBOMs from our supply chain, but kind of now, what does that mean, right? What comes next? And it's not enough to just have SBOMs. It's not enough to just focus on your supply chain. The challenge now is to understand that every step in your infrastructure, every piece of your infrastructure has some of these unique challenges. And this is where we can start talking about things like doing SBOM scanning and vulnerability scanning and having the ability to get a view into your infrastructure. And if you do this, try to do this manually, it is incredibly expensive and unsustainable. A lot of us, when Log4j hit, we had humans looking for Log4j, and it ground development to a halt. It was expensive. People got burnt out because of how much work it was. There were lots of mistakes because humans make mistakes. And so this is the challenge now, right? We can easily talk about it because of Log4j. It gave us that talking point that we didn't necessarily have before. And so now let's talk about, like, what does that mean? What does it mean in the context of a scanner? And so you can think about any software development lifecycle follows a certain number of processes, and you can scan things at each step of the process. And some scanners focus on one step. Some scanners run the gamut. It all depends. There's a lot of technology that does a lot of things here. And I think the important part is that you can't just focus on one spot. You can't say, I'm going to scan all my source code and that's it. That's not how this works, because every step along this path, you can have new and different things included into your supply chain. It can be your runtime as part of your supply chain. During build, you can have new dependencies brought in you didn't necessarily know about as part of your supply chain. There's so much that happens here. And so it's our job now to get a view of all of this stuff. And that's one of the challenges. I mean, one of my favorite examples is you could scan your source tree, find no Log4j, and then Log4j gets put in during the build phase. And if you weren't scanning after build, there's no way you would know this. And so it's what makes Log4j, I think, a unique and difficult challenge for us. Excuse me. And then there's also, if we look towards the bottom, one of the other things that really made it hard with scanners is Java specifically has a unique way of packaging up its artifacts. And so you can have jars, which is a Java archive, a jar inside of a jar inside of a jar, for example. So you could have Log4j hidden layers deep. And this again comes back to the problem of scanners can struggle to find this stuff. I mean, humans are going to struggle to find this as well. But it's saying a scanner is not the end all be all. The scanner is not going to necessarily find everything. You need to make sure you understand what are the limits of the tools I'm using. And this is obviously true of any tools we use in technology. And so this brings us now to where we wrap it all up. And this is focusing on the software bill of materials and thinking about this as an SBOM management problem. That's kind of really what we're looking at here is we have a supply chain. We know there's stuff in it. We have all these steps in our development process. We have SBOMs, which some of them we may have generated, some of them may have come from our vendors, and we have to put all the pieces together now. And this is where having an SBOM management solution is going to be incredibly important in the future, because as we progress with this technology, as we have more software bill of materials being generated, it goes from, okay, I'll just throw these SBOMs in a folder on the shared drive to, I now have 7 million SBOMs. How do I know what's going on? And there's issues of old SBOMs. There's questions about current SBOMs. There's future SBOMs that are going to come with our software. And so it's, excuse me, it's going to be a huge problem we have to deal with. And then you also have to have the ability to say, like, add policy, so you can make decisions about what is in this SBOM. For example, you could say, I don't want anything with Log4j deployed. Or you could say things like, okay, anything deployed today that has Log4j in it, leave that alone because that's probably infrastructure I need, but I don't want anything new including Log4j, during the last debacle we had, for example. Or you could say, only don't let this version of Log4j in because I know it's bad. And so there's so much that can happen in this space, and there's so much that's going to happen in this space, because this is, I mean, apart from the executive order obviously telling us it's going to happen, this is just good hygiene, right? This is good cyber hygiene for us in our development environments, in our runtime environments, just all of our infrastructure. Like, this is the future. This is what's going to happen. And we have to manage all of this technology. We have to manage all this infrastructure. And it's very exciting, to be honest with you, because it's not every day we get to be a part of a new and interesting problem that many of us have known about for a long time, but like now it is time to actually solve it. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this. I'm sure many of you are excited to be a part of this. Excuse me. And then I'll just kind of wrap it up. There's my contact info. I love talking about this stuff. If anyone has any questions or comments or wants to know more, we've got a link there to the Incor supply chain survey we ran. It's a great survey. Check it out. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much, Josh. We really appreciate it. Hope to have you back again sometime soon.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we have our second panel for the day, which I'll be moderating. And if our panelists could please come on camera. Before we begin, though, I just want to encourage the audience to please submit questions in the Q&A section of this platform. I would really like if this panel discussion could be super interactive. We'll be going through your questions throughout, as well as answer the poll questions in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credits. But with that said, I'm going to have each of our panelists please introduce yourself, share who you are, what agency you're with, anything else you would like our audience to know about you. This would be the time to share. So let's start with Jamie first, please.
Good morning. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm the CIO at the USPTO, and we are totally involved with the IT modernization and the efforts involved, and really looking forward to the whole discussion to ensue. So with that, I'll turn it over to others.
Thank you, Jamie. And let's hear from Ann next, please.
Morning. I'm not sure I can replicate Jamie's enthusiasm this morning. He clearly had lots of coffee. So I'm Ann Duncan. I'm the CIO for the Department of Energy. For this conversation, it's probably also worthwhile to mention that I am the chair of the CIO Council's Innovation Committee, and I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Thank you, Ann. And then we'll hear from Tina.
Good morning. I'm on my first cup of coffee, so I'll try to keep the tempo up. My name is Tina Dombeck. I'm a newly minted CIO at a newly minted federal agency, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, more simply referred to as DFC. Super excited about this conversation. I've loved listening to the past panel presentations, and I'll turn it over to the next one.
Thank you so much. And then we will hear from Nick.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nick Saki. I'm the principal technologist from the Office of the CTO for Pure Storage, covering North American public sector, and a proud supporter of at least 2 of the 3 agencies that are represented here today. So thank you so much for the time to speak today.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. So to start off, I want to hear from each of you about what your experience has been at your agency or organization when it comes to adapting to the new hybrid workforce. And in your response, if you could please tie in how this has affected your agency's IT modernization journey, I think that would be a good little twist to the question in order to stick to the topic that we're here for today. And then we'll just go back in the same order. So Ann, I would love to hear from you, or I'm sorry, Jamie, I would love to hear from you first.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, if folks didn't know, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office had a telework program with about 80% of our examiners prior to COVID. So we were old hat at telework. However, the 6,000 additional support workers added to the 14,000 simultaneous VPN connections we've had during the entire COVID, over 22 months now. So the fact of the matter is, we're really accustomed to it. The thing that we depended upon was the fact that we could scale that example. We could scale that foundation that we had. Now, most of the support workers weren't used to it. So that's where we had a lot of the problems, a lot of the resolutions that we had to come to, especially when it deals with the physical handing out of laptops or computers or the recruiting of individuals coming in. So the fact of the matter is, IT modernization was affected because we were right in the middle of a huge transformation. We had just stabilized the core of our functions, thank God. And what we did was we had to take a stutter step because we couldn't proceed with a lot of the plans that we had as they were envisioned. All we had to do though was 98% of our workforce was remote, and we improved our productivity because nobody was taking vacation. Yikes. That's not a good thing in the hybrid model. So people became used to working, and then we solidified our stuff within that first year. But we also noticed one thing. There were a lot of people wanting to get back to work. In the discussion of the hybrid workforce, it seems that 20% of the people will never come back. They're not going to want it. 20% of the people really want to come back full time, all the time in the office. And then you got that 60% in the middle who have a different way to look at it, back and forth. They'd like maybe 2 day or the 3 day, maybe 1-4, who knows? But the fact of the matter is, we've had to adjust this hybrid workforce to ensure that we have the same interactions. As an example, career progression is really concerning, because how do you make sure that you're promoting those people, not that you just see in the office, but that are also remote? And if you promote one, what happens when that person says, oh, that's unfair, you were always there? You know, that's why you got the promotion. Or you promote a remote worker, and the worker that's staying always there at the office is like, wait a second, I'm putting in the extra time, I'm coming in, everything else. You know, there's a no-win situation. So there's a lot of different leadership and management concepts that we have to talk to ensure equity across for the hybrid workforce. That's what I'd have to say.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'm going to pose the same question to all of our panelists, because while I'm sure there'll be some similarities in your answer, every person's, experience is different. So, Anne, over to you. How has your agency had to adapt to the new hybrid workforce, tying in IT modernization?
Kirsten, thanks very much for asking about that. I think it's a little premature for us to talk about the hybrid workforce because we're mostly still at home. We haven't reopened our offices yet. And we have the folks who are on site are primarily people who are working in secure environments, SCIFs, where they have to deal with classified material. And everyone else is actively being discouraged from coming to the office until fairly recently. So, it's a little early to know what that's going to look like, and we're still figuring that out. But, we know that there are a number of things that we need to be able to do to enable that. And number one is being able to set up our physical facilities and our online tools so that the people at home and the people in the office are on even footing. I was talking to an analyst a few months ago who said, oh yeah, people are coming to the office. They're just going to come to the office and they're going to sit in their offices and they're not going to go in the conference room, and it's just going to be like being at home. And I'm like, well, then why would you bring people back to the office if they're just going to sit in their offices and not go in the meeting room? So we need to enable our environment so that if there's a group of people in the conference room, the folks who are at home are on an even footing, because we all know what it used to be like when the one person on the phone could never get a word in edgewise, they couldn't hear half the people, they couldn't see people. So we're setting up our spaces to be more supportive of that. One of the gaps that we have found when everyone went home is the ability to do brainstorming and whiteboarding. So we're putting tools in place to do that. And more importantly, in my mind, we're setting up collaboration days. So for people who are not 100% remote in the Office of CIO, and right now there is nobody who's 100% remote, in part because we have the vast majority of our staff have security clearances, and they have them for a reason. And if you have a security clearance, you actually have to come to the office and use it. So we expect most of our folks to be in the office at least a couple of days of pay period. So we're setting up Wednesdays as the day that if you're only in 2 days pay period, that's the day you come in, and that day is focused on meetings. Because what we believe is, or what I believe is, if you're going to come in the office in their new world, you're coming in the office to talk to people. You are not coming to your office to sit at your desk and work. You can do that at home. You're coming in the office to meet with people, to talk to people, to have those serendipitous meetings you have in the hallway. And if we don't have people in all at the same time, that reduces that value of having people in and being able to have those hallway conversations, those water cooler conversations, those ones we've been missing, to be able to go out to lunch with your team, all those things. Because while we can be incredibly productive at home or wherever we might be, we can never get past the value of seeing each other in person. I've spent 20 plus years ago, I was working with remote teams that were all around the world, and that didn't stop us from getting everybody together. So we certainly should be able to get people together who work closely in the same geographic area. So that's the second thing. In terms of IT modernization, I think there's a couple things. One is it has sort of refocused what we need to do in terms of serving internal collaboration and how our employees work together, because we've really demonstrated people can be effective at home. So we need to have our modernization focus on those capabilities. It also has, shifted focus in some cases, particularly early in the pandemic, away from those modernization activities to getting people productive and fully capable working at home. But I think the biggest thing about modernization is simply it's put a new lens on the importance of digital tools and digital capabilities as we move into our next phase of modernization.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think that makes total sense. So Tina, I'm going to turn it over to you next as far as your experience and what you've been seeing going on at your agency specifically.
Yeah, no, thank you. So as I alluded, DFC is a fairly new agency. We were created in 2019, and most of you are not familiar with our name, but we grew out of the former agency known as OPIC. So we had a lot of legacy culture left over from the OPIC environment, as well from the technology side of the house. We had a lot of technology that hadn't been touched in years and had not been modernized. So when we initially went remote, and we're in the same boat as Anne, we have not yet fully embraced hybrid, but we're certainly are planning and getting things ready for that. As we moved to remote, we had to move fairly quickly with getting the right technologies in place to facilitate that. We were already going down the road of virtual desktops, already had VPN in place, et cetera, but we really had to accelerate our path to technology adoption. So with that, the interesting thing from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges or things that we had to adapt to was not necessarily the technologies and getting those in place. We already had collaboration tools there. It was pretty much the training aspect of everything. So getting people used to using a lot of the tools that we already had in our arsenal, but maybe they hadn't used them in the way that we needed them to now that they were remote. So we bumped up training just on things like, how to collaborate over document sharing, how to use properly, the WebEx tools and Zoom. And it was interesting because out of the small CIO working group, Sylvia Burns, she shared with the group some best practices around hybrid meetings. So even just down to the tactical level of just getting people to, dial into a meeting and having the proper protocol has gone a long way with adoption. I will say from a success perspective, being a small agency, being new, as I alluded, there's very much a startup mentality, a lot of embracement of new ways of doing things, so much so that it's reflective that the agency had its best year last year from a commitment perspective. So clearly technology is, facilitating the mission well. As far as our IT modernization and what we're looking at there and what, moving in the hybrid direction has changed, I would say we're looking at more ways to reduce our on-premise footprint. If things are going to become more remote, more hybrid, certainly the infrastructure that supports it, we should be making the same concerted efforts to minimize that on-site infrastructure so there's less to support in the future. That's it.
Thank you so much, Tina. And Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you next, your experience at Pure Storage and some of the ways that you are adapting.
Thank you, Kirsten. So obviously, there is a lot of commonality across enterprises, whether they're in corporate, commercial, or in government, because essentially there are no unique technology problems, unique technology applications, of course. But in this regard, we've been as affected as everybody else on this panel due to obviously the changes in the hybridization of the workforce. And while a large portion of our workforce has been virtual for as long as we've existed, obviously our core engineering and support organizations were on site. It fosters collaboration, it creates a more efficient development environment, and obviously the team collaboration and cohesion is critical to ensuring that we can adequately build great products and then support our customers to the standard which we're known. So providing the IT services and infrastructure to support remote work was a huge priority over the course of the past 2 years, but particularly in 2020. And also we had to implement capabilities to better support collaboration and coordination to keep that team cohesion and to facilitate efficient development and advancement of our products. And lastly, we produce and develop the platforms that we manufacture. So production, manufacturing, and logistics became a significant effort to ensure we were able to maintain our customary delivery timelines, not through tremendous disruption in supply chains. So we were fortunate in that we had a lot of the infrastructure necessary to do this already. But what we had to do is rapidly expand the availability of those services universally across a globally distributed workforce. And that's been tremendous credit to our CIO and our company's rapid ability to pivot and adopt technology platforms, but also a credit to our suppliers who, we're service customers of a wide variety of companies as well. And we were able to put all this in place literally in a matter of weeks. So it's been as challenging for us as it has been for everybody else. And perhaps we were, somewhat better positioned because of the distributed nature of a global workforce already, but the challenges persist. Onboarding people is easy. Offloading them or off-ramping them is actually also a challenge all of its own. Because if you've sent all this equipment and access out remotely, you've got to ensure that you get it back. And obviously you close out people who've decided to pursue other opportunities or what have you. So there's sort of an end-to-end IT service lifecycle that has to be considered and refined as well in order to ensure that you maintain your security posture and you maintain your efficiency going forward.
Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate you all sharing with me your perspectives. So we're going to go ahead and pop up poll question number 1 before we dive into my second question I have prepared. And I also want to remind the audience that if there's anything you want our panelists to elaborate upon, please send them in through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But all right, here we go. We have poll question number 1 up, and we just want to poll our audience on what the biggest internal or external change you expect to impact your team this year would be, from securing a remote workforce to cloud migration projects, new compliance requirements, third-party access, furthering IT mod, new manager or leadership, zero trust mandates, or other, if there's another option that we don't have listed. So please, if you're at home and you want to receive your CPE credit, take a moment to answer that poll, and we'd like to see what some of those responses look like. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pose question number 2. Oh, we already have our poll results up. All right, so it looks like majority is saying, it's kind of all over the place, but furthering IT mod and new compliance requirements, as well as zero trust. So we've got our challenges cut out for us this year. But question number 2 I'm going to ask is to elaborate further upon the future of IT modernization and where you see this going, as well as tying in what emerging technologies or tools, or you could even speak to some best practices if you'd like with this answer. So just kind of where you see the future, or if you are not really sure at this point where you think we should be going when it comes to IT modernization. I'll begin with Anne again, please.
Hey, thanks.
I'm messing the order up. I'm so sorry, but it's because Anne is the first on my screen. Anne, we'll start with you and then we'll move to Jamie.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Kirsten. So I think, IT modernization, there's a couple things going on. One is that departments and agencies have been working really hard to look at modernization differently since 2014, 2015, when we realized that we just need to do things differently. And what we've done is we've sort of created these pockets of digital transformation, modernization across our organizations, particularly when you talk about using modern development practices. So whether this is my prediction of where it's going or where I think it needs to go, that's another conversation, or where I'm going to try and drive it. But we really need to take those pockets of modern practices and tools and scale them out across our departments and agencies. And I think, we're at DOE, we're building out a playbook of how to do that, how to scale modernization across a department and agency. And we want to share that as we get it built, we'll share it across the government. So hopefully we can do this not only at DOE, but across the federal government. And some of the kind of plays in that are fairly obvious. Things like building a low-code platform that you can use across your organization, building a rapid ATO process, having a DevSecOps pipeline that's replicable across your organization, basically making it easy for people to use your modern tools, hard for them to do things that are outside that modern process. So that's sort of number one for me is how do we scale that across the organization? And when you look at that too, you have to realize that you can build all those tools and capabilities, but really you also have to build the enablers, which are people and processes and procurement and your culture. So we need to continue our focus on changing our cultures to embrace modern development technologies, on changing our procurement processes, or using the best practices across procurement, the best practices across hiring, and simplifying our processes so that all of these things enable us to, build these very resilient, scalable, modern tools in the cloud. So those are my thoughts, and I will yield to Jamie now.
Thank you.
Amen. And I couldn't agree with you more. Oh my goodness, it's all about culture. Because no matter how good you do things, right? Are you doing the things that are good? So, the job of leadership is not to do those things. The job of leadership is to make sure you're doing the right things. Okay. And one of the things about cultural change and that getting that modernization to scale across the enterprise, we took wholeheartedly embraced it about 3 years ago when I first came on board, because it was a new day. It was a new dawn. And so what we said was there were new ways of working. And so I like the whole thing about challenge the status quo. Just because you did it that way doesn't mean that you keep doing that way if you want efficiency and gains and growth. So that was a good first start. The thing is, the patent office has been around for over 200 years. These people know what they're doing. So trying to tell them to do something different is like, yeah, right, we've done that before, we'll do it. The thing is, you take different examples and you slowly build a momentum where you get a whole culture of, wait a second, that can work, that can change. But you have to show it in small increments such that you get that following. Right now in the IT modernization world, we're about 60% complete. We're nowhere near as complete, but now we're getting into the really sticky problems, right? One of the big things that I did culturally to change the organization was go from project management, which is nothing wrong with, but it was starting and stopping, and there were fits and starts, and there were all this administration around the stopping of a project and the starting of one. So instead of doing that, I created the product management mentality to the point where we took over 160 projects and we mapped them to 30 products. And now we have a product owner. It's not just an IT guy in charge of a project. Now it's a business owner in charge of that function, making sure that they're creating the priorities and doing the trade-offs between business cases of pros and cons and when to eliminate your technical debt such that you don't incur that going on, and you wait for a feature functionality until that technical debt can be ensured that you're secure. So that's getting that emphasis of DevSecOps in the agility of the organization. And we have had effect on other organizations as well, to the point where the C-suite now has rethought their verbose mission. And we're actually coming out with a better mission statement from the executive suite, which I really like. And we're changing people at the line level, at the tactical level. Now, I've said at the top and at the bottom, but how about that stodgy middle? That's where everything just grinds to a halt, because those people didn't get promoted based on what you're talking about, the new stuff. They got promoted based on the old stuff. So there's where the real problem exists. And that's where you have to ensure that you're gaining momentum, that you have to make sure you reach out and say, what's the problem? Why aren't we going forward on this? And that's where the cultural change comes in too. Just give it a chance and make it happen. I could go on all day, but I'm going to yield the floor.
Thank you, Jamie. And Tina, I would like to hear from you next on the future of IT modernization.
Oh, Kirsten, you really messed up the ordering here. Going after Jamie's difficult. You're a tough act to follow. Both you and Ann, you have a lot of great things to say. I would say, I would echo most of everything that you said. Extremely important. We're in a different situation. I think both of you talked about scalability. We're so small. We're working on keeping our footprint small, not necessarily scaling it to be large. So from my perspective, our modernization efforts really entail understanding what we have and what can we get rid of? What do we no longer have to manage? Do we have the right skills in place to manage what we want to keep? We're about 75 to 80% in the cloud. I'd love to increase that number to be even more in the cloud. The less that we have to deal with on premise, it just means there's more focus on the mission and the work. So from my perspective, understanding the people, process, the tools that you have at the as is, figuring out where your to-be is, and putting a plan in place. I think Jerry said something earlier that resonated with me about keeping it basic. That's really where we're at as far as moving forward, is keeping it basic, and just putting a plan in place and getting there.
Thank you, Tina. And Nick, I know your perspective may be a bit different coming from industry, so please share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, Kirsten. Kind of interesting. It's a symbiotic relationship. Our customers want to modernize, and we help them do that by providing the capabilities for them to do so. So the other benefit is we get to see a vast array of different organizations implementing new data strategies, implementing new service infrastructure platforms, and changing the way they're doing business as well. And we're able to communicate that to our customers in government. So the things that we're seeing are the virtualization of applications, whereas it used to be the virtualization of systems using containerization and Kubernetes. Anne alluded to this earlier. So artificial intelligence and machine learning platforms as a service acquisition and deployment models, improving energy and environmental impacts through consolidation and the implementation of cloud services, is facilitating containers supporting DevOps, DevSecOps, and AI and ML capabilities. Kubernetes and containers are rapidly transforming the underlying application infrastructure and architecture, and promoting a flexibility in terms of modernization and innovation that's having a monumental impact on modernization with agencies and across our customer base. So we're seeing rapidly accelerating adoption in enterprises after around a 5-year period of discovery, testing, and implementation, because nobody operating a large infrastructure is going to sort of take a dare of hanging the entire enterprise on a new technology. So what we see often is that very large customers really start to learn, discover, experiment, and then implement going forward. And we're starting to see that implementation period happen broadly across the government. Now, the last thing is modernize data service infrastructure to improve simplicity, security, performance, economics, and environmental factors, is providing that performance, agility, and economics to match up to the advances in compute and networking. This is especially true in areas such as cloud platforms, and again, analytics, AI, and machine learning, and infrastructure consolidation and data center modernization, as well as the extension of the on-premises data center services to cloud-based services, really learning to do data management and data service rather than infrastructure management of storage platforms, compute platforms, and networking. So that's fundamentally changing how CIOs tend to think about their infrastructure and creating sort of this boundaryless IT estate. So I'll give you an example of how this fundamentally works, particularly in energy improvement and efficiency and rack space improvement. So in 2015, we developed, or we sold, a system that was 6U tall and provided 70 terabytes of infrastructure. So since 2015, we've improved the density of those systems from 70 terabytes to 1.4 petabytes in a single system. That's a 20-fold increase in capability and capacity, while reducing the rack space of that system from 5U to 6U. So we made it 20 times more capable and shrunk it by 1 rack unit. So we've also effectively improved energy consumption of that system by 20x as well, since the systems we sell today consume the same amount of power as the systems of 2015 did. But you can put a monumentally large number of virtual machines, containers, and their associated data in that kind of an environment, effectively eliminating racks, or in some cases, in some of our customers' cases, literally whole data centers worth of legacy infrastructure, and then seamlessly connecting that to external service infrastructure, providing that mobility, resilience, and economics and efficiency of leveraged off-premises service infrastructure. So those are the things we're seeing. There's a change in the acquisition model. There's obviously improvements in technology, and that's helping agencies and our customers deliver on their performance, security, and environmental goals for their infrastructure modernization efforts.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing that with us and all of our panelists. So we're going to move on now to poll question number 2. And our audience, if you could please answer in order to receive your CPE credits. We just want to gauge how important is emerging technology to strengthening your agency's IT modernization. So go ahead and rank how important you think that is. And we are almost out of time on this panel discussion, but I do want to circle back to our poll question number 1 and just discuss a little bit more about challenges. So our poll question number 1 was, what's the biggest internal or external change you expected to impact your team this year? And there was a list. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat so that you can review the options, but it ranged from securing a remote workforce, zero trust mandates, new compliance requirements, management leadership, and a few other options. You can read through those. So to wrap up our panel discussion, I just want to ask our panelists, what challenges has your agency had to overcome when furthering IT modernization, and what solutions did you implement to overcome these challenges? So maybe just pick one. I'm sure there's plenty of challenges, but your top one, and if you have, some words of encouragement for our audience members as far as what they can bring back to their agency to, really get through those challenges, I'm sure they'll arise. We'll start again with Anne, please.
Sure. Thank you, Kirsten. So I think I'm going to tie 2 of these together, which is new compliance requirements and specifically zero trust or more generally security and EO. So, we've had a tremendous number of new requirements placed upon us by, the OMB, the White House, CISA, you name Congress, you name the folks. We've had a bunch of people giving us things we need to do for a lot of things, including security. And in all those cases, we constantly have to balance compliance and risk because, I'll be quick here because I know we're out of time. We can't do it all. So what we're doing is we're looking at what's going to reduce our risk the most. And then we're implementing solutions that reduce our risk the most, knowing that we can't comply with everything we're being asked to do.
Thank you, Anne. And just so you know, I've been told we need to go until 12, so feel free to elaborate upon your responses as much as you'd like. Jamie, over to you next.
That's not fair. Anne should have some more time. Anyway, no.
I'll give the floor before we end.
Good. I agree with Anne wholeheartedly. Security and compliance. It's not to have no risk, N-O. It's to know your risk, K-N-O-W. Please, if you can emphasize that within your organization, that's really key. The biggest challenge, not internal to the CIO, is the cultural change, agility, DevSecOps. Don't do the status quo challenge, right? But outside the CIO, it's to ensure that security awareness, that cyber hygiene, the ability to say, don't press the link because then you expose our systems. How are you going to minimize that exposure to prevent a lateral acceleration out throughout the organization? So it's all about security remediation. One of the things that USPTO did really quickly, really fast, and made that decision was Log4j. It just happened. We had to get it because people were attacking us. Now, that doesn't mean our other defenses didn't work. They did, but you have to take care of the vulnerabilities when they occur. So you should always be ready and vigilant when these things occur, because it's not if, it's when. And having that whole planning concept, what are you going to do when this happens, prevents you from going into a chaotic crisis mode where everybody's on heightened alert and they don't make good decisions. You need to be stone cold in your execution of remediation to ransomware or any phishing attempts or whatever it might be. That is the biggest challenge. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. And then over to Tina.
Yeah, boy, we have a different response for this as well. And I think just indicative of the size of our organization and where we're at in the growth pattern. But resources is our biggest challenge. Responding to all of the executive orders and, putting us on the right path. 2 years ago, our CIO shop had 5 federal employees. Our CISO shop had 1, and that was the CISO. We've grown over the last 2 years to 13. And I know you guys all have smiles on your faces because you guys have CIO shops that you have 400, hundreds of people, right? So we're dealing with a little bit of a different battle here. It's just getting the right skills in place. We're lean and mean. We've got a team now of 13 people and we have 17 vacancies. So for me, it's really plugging the right people in to go where we need to go. So from that perspective, if you're in a similar boat, obviously building the business case to sell to leadership of why you need the added resources, being able to put it simply, not in technical terms, using pictures, as Jerry alluded to, getting that one-page strategy document down, which Jerry, I love. I think Gartner has been a big push or promoter of that one-page strat plan. Being able to sell why you need the added resources. That's where we're at.
Thank you, Tina. And Nick, will end the question with you.
Well, I think that our story is very, very similar. The challenges that we've had to face, build versus buy, and the rationalization of IT services. I mean, we make data service platforms. There are a large number of cloud platforms that are built on what we make. So the question is, do we do this in-house or do we leverage the capabilities of some of our customers or other services? So rationalizing those things and making the right choices is obviously as important to us as it is to anybody else. There's a huge focus, a driver on this that often gets overlooked, but Ann mentioned it and so did Jamie. It's security, data protection, and continuity of operations. Every service can and will go down at some point in a 12-month period, whether it's yours or you're leasing it from somebody else. So we have to just sort of determine what's the criticality of what we're putting where. Do we want to be completely responsible for it, or are we satisfied that our vendor is going to be able to support what we need and remediate in a timely fashion? Those are huge existential questions for any agency when you're talking about the most valuable thing in your agency, your data. And then lastly is the rapid pace of technological innovation. So staying on top of what's out there, what's available, and how to leverage it. Now, this probably sounds really funny coming from a manufacturer, but we have to be on top of these things 3 to 5 years in advance as well. We've got to sort of sit there and assess the viability and utility of new platforms and new technologies to understand how we want to implement them to support what our customers want to do. So all of this stuff keeps us up at night as well.
Thank you, Nick. And so we have a few minutes left, and I just want to, we discussed challenges. We'll end on more of a positive note now. So I want to know, first of all, because ATARC is all about connecting people and learning from one another, if there is any place that you want our audience to be able to connect with you with, maybe you're on LinkedIn, maybe you're on Twitter, maybe there's an event coming up where you're speaking at, or any working groups you're involved in, this would be the time to mention it, as well as anything that you just want to leave with our audience that hasn't already been said. We'll go through our panel one more time just to make sure that we're not forgetting anything. And Ann, over to you.
Yeah, Kirsten, thanks. I think I'd start by saying the message that I want to make sure people hear is that, CIOs have it, CIOs and IT leaders and IT staff have it within our power to make a better government that are good stewards of taxpayer dollars and that provides better services to the public. And we see, if you pay attention, you can continually see how the services we're providing to the public are continuing to improve as a government as a whole. I mean, a great example was, and it's a relatively simple website, but the rollout of the test delivery website last week that came out a day early and worked great. And, in spite of all the predictions that it would be another healthcare.gov, now recognizing it's a far simpler effort than healthcare.gov was. But I think we've demonstrated maturity in delivering technology as a government. And I think that everyone who's involved can help with that. So that's my my first thought on that. Just please encourage everybody to go out with that mentality that you can make a difference and to try and make a difference. In terms of where to connect with me, sure, I'm on Twitter. I both have a personal account and a DOE CIO account. I tweet from one, maybe someone else tweets from the other one. And that I'm on LinkedIn as well. And you can probably find me at other events coming up in the next few months. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And there you have it, folks. So you can go follow Ann on Twitter. Jamie, over to you next.
I really do enjoy following Ann because I can agree with her on everything. It's just phenomenal. I will say, if you don't have the customer experience as one of your primary objectives and goals, you're wrong. It's all about public service. And we have to make these things better for the public. They are atrocious. One of the big worries that I have about web design and the actual entrance into government service is the fact that all of our websites currently replicate the myriad of bureaucratic organizations that are inside the bureaucracy. Have you ever gone to a DMV website? It replicates all the different departments that you have to go through to get your services done. I'm not saying it's really bad. In fact, it's pretty good now. But the problem is we're developing websites not with the public in mind. We're dividing it about what we do in our bureaucracy. How can we make our bureaucracy more efficient? Who cares? How can we make it better for the taxpayer? For God's sake, that's where we need to get to. So I'm all about the customer experience. Where you can reach me, LinkedIn is great. Go to the USPTO, make it happen. Go, go, go. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And I would call on Tina next, but I think we may have lost her. So if she pops back in, then we'll hand it over to her. But Nick, where can people find you and anything else you want to leave with our audience with?
Thanks, Kirsten. So I am also on Twitter. I'm at PureSaki, which I put into the chat. You can visit us at www.purestorage.com and you can reach out to me directly. I am Saki, P-S-A-K-I, at purestorage.com. We'll also be at the 2022 Rocky Mountain Cyber Symposium in Colorado Springs, Colorado next month. So if you get the opportunity to come visit us, we really look forward to meeting with you.
Thank you. And I'm also going to mention that Nick is a podcast host for the ATARC Federal IT Newscasts, where they discuss the modern data experience. So you can go subscribe and hear his episodes there.
Thanks for the shameless plug, Kirsten. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you all for taking the time being here. This was a fantastic discussion. Hope to have you back again soon. And we are ready for our final panel of the day. So thanks, everyone. And if our next round of panelists could go ahead and come on camera, we will begin our next 30-minute segment. All right. Okay. So again, I don't need to remind our audience of this, but if you have questions for our panelists, send them in and answer the poll questions in order to get CPE credits for today. And I'm going to go ahead and have each of our panelists introduce themselves first. Who are you? What agency are you with? What brings you here today? Anything else you'd like to share with our audience? Let's kick it off with Nagesh, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is G. Nagesh Rao. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Bureau of Industry and Security. We are a small but mighty regulatory national security and IC bureau within the U.S. Department of Commerce that governs issues around export, trade, and controls.
Thank you so much. And then over to Sean.
Hey, good afternoon, Kristen. And hello to my fellow panelists, Thomas and Nagesh. I'm Sean Costello. I'm the acting CIO at the Federal Communications Commission. I've been with the agency close to almost 2 years now. It's my first foray into the federal service. I've spent a little over 30 years in the private sector, primarily the last 20 in healthcare. So excited to be here today and join my fellow panelists. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you. And Thomas, over to you next.
Hi, thank you. My name is Thomas Peng, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the Peace Corps. And Kirsten, was this also a little bit to kind of frame set some things I wanted to say today, or
Sure. Yeah, go ahead and share anything you would like, and we'll dive into the questions that we discussed the other day afterwards. But yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Like, one of the things that I wanted to let you all know is that, I, like many of you, have both experience working in the office and also being a fully remote worker, but maybe a little bit different that I have been working for 7 years fully remote at 100% remote companies prior to joining the federal government. So as I think about the past two organizations that I've been at, and as I think about hybrid work is really different. Because they're office work, you're in the office. If you're remote work, you're always remote. But hybrid work means sometimes you're in the office, sometimes you're not, right? And the question I keep asking myself as I think about this is, what are we going to default to, right? Programming world, defaults are a pre-selected option when none is made for the user. And the pandemic has taken away a lot of our defaults. When you go outside, am I going to wear a mask? Am I not going to wear a mask? What kind of mask should I wear? N95, cloth, surgical with a cloth on top of it. And then, like, for me as a parent, are my kids going to be in person school this week? Are they going to be in virtual school? Are they going to be a close contact, so they have to quarantine for some time? Those defaults are all blown out of the water, right? Disruptions are abound. The thing about defaults, and the important why I think about that, is because they reduce cognitive load. The load on our brains, that stress that you're feeling, it's because we've really increased the cognitive load on us because these defaults are taken away. Lower cognitive load means we have more capacity to reason and think, address the hard parts about our job. And as we talk today, I'm going to be thinking about what are the defaults, what has changed, and how can we use technology, emerging technology, if you will, to help reduce the cognitive load and make collaboration more equitable. So I just kind of framed that a little bit, but I thought it'd be good to drop that in.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's a really good way for us to begin the conversation. So what I was going to ask each of you is, what has actually been your favorite part of the hybrid or working from home structure? Whichever one you're doing, you can clarify if you're 100% at home right now, or if you are shifting over to a hybrid, or maybe you're back in the office full time. So I would really love to hear what your perspective has been, your favorite part specifically, and anything else that you would like to share about your own personal experience. I think it would be really interesting to get to hear from each of you on that. So Nagesh, I'm going to turn it over to you first, please.
Sorry about that. Hey, so I think this is a great opportunity for us to talk about the future of hybrid work, right? This is that concept right now of, like, how do we use the tools in front of us to be able to effectively impact the mission in a positive manner. And I think, as we've all seen, and this is, I've said this before a few times, and the last speaker, Jamie Holcomb, is a dear friend and colleague of mine from the Commerce Corps of CIOs. He and I have been on panels before. We've talked about this issue at length, which is, you saw this burst of energy on the IT front over the last 2 years that has basically leapfrogged a lot of us around the world on how do we work in a telework and remote work kind of situation. And I think what it boils back down to is ensuring that we're meeting the stakeholder needs for our community and the right tools at the right time for the right place, right? So I kind of threw this quip out there as an anecdote. Recently I became a father back in April. So over the last year, I've been taking intermittent paternity leave, but because I'm the CIO for a pretty important bureau, I have to still stay on top of things and make sure things are going according to plan. And that, funny enough, back in November, I took a little bit of paternity leave. I spaced out over the year. And but I was still checking email, and I was still signing documents and reviewing documents and whatnot. And I did an experiment back in November because I was on leave. I left my work laptop at home, and I only took my mobile device with me. And I was able to do everything I needed to do off the mobile device pretty succinctly. I would say about 90% effective. And folks were a little taken aback by that because, on the one hand, I'm answering emails as I'm trying to rock my son to sleep. And they're like, hey, aren't you on leave? And I said, yeah, but I'm checking emails. He's asleep in my arms. I can do that. I can double fist. I've had some practice double fisting, and they're just kind of like, wait, what? And as I'm responding to emails and stuff, I'm actually signing documents in OneDrive and stuff like that. And they're just like, whoa, what's going on here? And I go, this is the benefit of, taking advantage of the next generation tools that are before us. And I think this has been a critical thing about the use of cloud and remote capabilities and whatnot, is you can actually be pretty impactful and effective as long as you use the right tools and the smart tools and be effective in the smart way. And I think a lot of this comes back down to just helping people train up and be comfortable with the new tools in front of us and out there. Is the more comfortable they become with it and a little bit more acclimated, the easier it is for them to adjust to this transition, because we leapfrogged 10 plus years. And in the case of BIS, when I arrived at the Bureau, our technology stack was dating to 2004, 2008 era of time. We're not there anymore with the hardware front. We've migrated completely, primarily for the most part, on the hardware front, and we're modernizing our software front. But we're leaps and bounds farther away now than where we were a year and a half ago when I took the helm. And I think it comes back down to just making some key smart decisions, forecasting what the future looks like, and then being able to leapfrog ahead so we can take advantage of those tools in a responsible manner to help impact the mission appropriately. And I think it comes back to the humanizing element, right? I was able to rock my baby boy to sleep and then sign a document on my iPhone and ship it off to colleagues. And they're just like, wait, did this just happen? Aren't you with your son? I go, yeah. And here's the selfie with me and the son. So proof that as I signed the document, I am rocking my son to sleep. So I will pause there.
Yeah, thank you, Nagesh, for sharing that with us, and congratulations on your new baby.
Thanks. And my wife now knows the truth, so she's now like, wait, what? You were working a while rocking the son? She's heard this a couple of times now, and she's like, wait, I thought you were just focused on the son. I said, he was asleep. But you're going to take advantage of it.
Yeah, it really. Yeah, no, it really is fascinating how, you can go through these major, life transitions. I myself just moved from DC to Florida because I'm 100% remote. And while that also, presents its challenges with work, it's possible to do in a work from home or even hybrid approach. So thank you for sharing that with us. Sean, I would love to hear from you next.
Thank you, Kristen. And similarly, I want to congratulate Nagesh on your firstborn newborn. So congratulations to you and your family. That's awesome. I have to tell you, I think both Nagesh and Thomas have really set the table in terms of conversation. Thomas's points about cognitive load. I feel, like largely every day, we're all part of this large social experiment, right? This pandemic social experiment, so to speak, in terms of how work and life mesh. And what technology brings to bear to, on some level, not only meet the business needs of an organization or agency, but actually exceed pre-pandemic, capabilities on some levels, right? I think Nagesh, speaks to it. You're out of the office. We've all known, right, through our careers that's both that's a double-edged sword in terms of, if you're completely disconnected, we know we have catch up, especially from a leadership perspective, right? Where so much is counting on you. You have so many stakeholders. So during this pandemic time, we've seen, just as Nagesh has pointed out, our cognitive loads, especially for high-performing cultures, right? An organization where folks are naturally wired, in many cases, to quote unquote always be on. That always on factor, so to speak, has, in my mind and through my experience over the last 2 years, grown exponentially. So the cognitive load, back to Thomas's point, and this is, I think in some areas supported by data, because it's recent data, albeit much of it hasn't been sort of peer reviewed, so to speak. But that also comes with the work-life balance issue and discussions that we have. So I think there's a lot of great opportunity not only to improve our capabilities in terms of productivity, but also balance it out cognitively with an appropriate work-life balance. Certainly tools like Nagesh has spoken to allow us in critical situations to be responsive. And then going back to the prior conversation and what Jamie's sharing, be accessible in moments of crisis, right? And that's fantastic. So, hats off to Thomas to setting the table, with that cognitive load discussion, because I don't know you can really separate technology from its cognitive impacts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thomas, I'm going to turn it over to you then as well. And initially my question was, your favorite part of hybrid or working from home and what your own experiences look like. I think you mentioned that you were 100% remote. Is that still the case? Are you still 100% remote?
I am. It's been a bit of a transition. So I was hybrid for a little while, a brief blip, and then Omicron, and then we're encouraged not to go to the office. But of course, my team is we throughout the pandemic, we've had people in the office working at the office because we do have service desk and different things that we need to do to support shipping, laptops, logistics, etc. And I kind of had to reach back, right? Like what do I really like? But even coming in, my favorite part about remote work, the Peace Corps is a globally distributed agency with a global mission. We've got 60 plus posts across the world, right? And so one of the things I really love about, kind of the tools and collaboration tools, Zoom, is bridging the gaps of distance and bringing that collaboration. So one of the things that I have been able to do is I've been able to come in and have town halls. Now, time zones are still a challenge, but I have two things that were really critical. Town halls and my open office hours, which I could flex, right? Town halls are a little bit harder. It is biased to the Eastern time zone. But, I was able, we have IT staff, they may not directly report to me, but people executing this OCIO's mission, and they're able to attend. Right. And so just being able to connect in that way to so much more of the agency, that's a huge win. Right. And with office hours, my predecessors, and I'm making some assumptions, for the most part, many of them never met with our IT specialists in the field until they took a trip and got on a plane and went and visited, and you visited however many you can in the time and the budget you have. I've met over 24 of those ITSs, spent some quality time talking about what's the situation in Mongolia and Indonesia, in Nepal, and throughout all these things in different parts of Africa. And so it's just amazing that I'm able to connect. Like, the world is smaller. I feel like this is a very old thing, like before it used to be telephones or whatever, but like, the way that I'm able to connect with that, and I really love that aspect. I've already declared, people are like, oh, what are we going to do when we go back? I said, let me tell you, town halls are going to remain, but I'm going to sit in my office. If y'all want to go gather in a conference room, that's fine. I'm going to sit in my office because we're going to connect with everyone here. Now, and I think that's like, yeah, that's one of the things I really love about that. From the personal aspect, it's really interesting. Hybrid work I found, so I drop my son out at school in the morning, and prior to, I just come back, right? My office is actually closer to my son's school than, and so for the time when it was like sort of okay, kosher to go into the office, was like, I was doing that, right? And I would just go drop him off, and it's easier pickup. It's actually less commute time, believe it or not. But I think it's just interesting. You don't know what's going to happen, right? I was like, I'm going to try it out, and I was like, this is really good. I really like the office. But one of the things I learned from there was, there's one day someone's in the office and they swung by, and I was on a call, and I waved and I said, I'll come to you later. And then I went by, and this went by like 4 or 5 times, and I said, forget it. I'm messaging. And we worked it out over Messenger. It was just fine, but we were trying to get that human, but it's far more effective actually to still use the tools that we had grown accustomed to be using. So it's interesting. So I hope I hit that first part, which is what do I love about it? And yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm going to have another question in a moment, but let's go ahead and pop up our first poll question for this panel, just so we can knock it out. I believe it's going to be, in your opinion, there we go. What is the importance behind using emerging technologies to enable a hybrid workforce? So go ahead and just answer that. It'll be so that you can receive your CPE credit for attending today's session. And then the next question that I want to pose to our panelists is, what do you say to others as encouragement for the future of hybrid work in the federal government? So I'll elaborate on that a little bit. I feel like we've seen, there's people who have had to realize how they best work, right? And I think, Sean, you alluded to this a little bit when it comes to cognitive overload, but I think that it really takes strong leaders in place to help their, people who are working with them or for them to better navigate this space. Some people are like, oh, I'm an extrovert. I really feel the need to be, in person. I miss that office environment. And some people are like, heck no, I want to stay in my PJs and work from the kitchen every single day. And then there's people like me who kind of want a little bit of a balance of both. I like to be in person, but I do feel way more efficient when I'm at home and I'm focused and I can go work from a coffee shop, let's say, and just kind of knock out some stuff that I don't need to be in person for. So that all being said, I just wanted to set the stage for where this question goes is, how do you best encourage people when it comes to this space that we're in? Because we can only control so much, right? We can't control the pandemic right now. We're trying to control the pandemic right now. But when it comes to, encouragement for the future of hybrid, how do you go about this with, the people who are looking to you for leadership, for mentorship? What are some words of encouragement that you can give to others? And we'll go in the same order. Nagash, I'll start with you first.
Sure. Look, I've always been a fan of telework from the early days. In fact, I was a patent examiner way back, 2004 era time when I, opted into the career federal service from the private sector a little bit. And Patent Office was one of the first agencies to actually experiment with telework capabilities and whatnot. And I found it effective back then. And it came down to what my management said at Patent Office back in the day, during my intellectual property law career days. And I've done a lot of career pivots since, but it's about accessibility and timeliness, right? So if staff are accessible and Sean mentioned that already, the accessibility piece, but also being timely on and responsiveness. I think if folks are doing their job, being effective when doing their job and actually making good use of the tools in person or, or remote, whatever it may be, I think that it comes down to just ensuring that trust factor is there. Like, I don't want to have to micromanage. I don't want to have to bird dog. And if I don't have to, and people are empowered to feel like they can free to do the work, whatever hour they want. I've got some night owls on my team who are more effective at night working their job than they are during the day. I'm totally fine with that as long as the work is done. As the work is done and it's effectively done and it's not an issue, then I don't want to have to be draconian. But sometimes if work's not being addressed appropriately, then yeah, draconian measures have to happen. But quite frankly, I'd prefer to work in a situation where folks are self-empowered and responsible. And if they're self-empowered and responsible, it shouldn't matter where you are doing your job as long as the job gets done.
Absolutely. And Sean, over to you next.
I think this whole conversation, continues to be grounded in that initial table setting that Thomas offered, by way of cognitive load. And at the end of the day, whether we're in the office or we're remote, or the hybrid, I think it's important to ensure that we're striking an appropriate work-life balance, because again, with technology and even emerging technologies, that some of which really are only just now coming onto the scene or have yet to be seen in terms of how AI will help out and natural language processing, so on and so forth. I think it's important. I know it's important. Maintain some of the basics in life in terms of good sleep, proper sleep, nutrition, activity, right? Those are so important. And in terms of staff, right, getting back to your original question, how do we maintain connectivity in this hybrid workforce? I arrived at the FCC in April of 2020, just when, all federal agencies and, most of the world ended up, going home. We went on lockdown. And so I didn't know anyone coming into the FCC. So for me, video technology was super important. And it just so happened, by the way, that timing was such that we were just pushing out Teams. So got on board with that. That was super helpful. By the same token, upon my first experiences of going into the office, it just so happens, by the way, that the FCC during this period was building out a new headquarters building in the district. And my team largely responsible for, the technology enablement with the new building. So working with them going in, again, appropriately socially distanced, was huge for me, right? And then even more recently, after being here for nearly 2 years, going in, has an element associated with it, an element of camaraderie, esprit de corps, that when you're actually working shoulder to shoulder on things, that I don't know you can fully attain working remotely. So tying that in, back to your original question, and what my experience has been, I think it's important that we do maintain this interaction, not just in video interaction and digitized interactions, not just in the sense of work meetings, but also reaching out to see how your team's doing. Make sure you have that open door policy, much like Thomas mentioned earlier, office hours, so to speak. Meet people where they are, right? Demonstrate a level of empathy and recognition for the fact that, again, back to the social experiment, we're all going through this together. There's a lot that technology can do to improve all that, but we also know that with too much of anything, we have to be careful of that. So my experience, just real quick, and I'll close out. I went through different opinions over the last 2 years in terms of what I preferred. And at the end of the day, I've arrived at the place where I know I will be most productive in a hybrid environment where I have the right mix between in-office, in-person, and remote flexibility.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Thomas, over to you.
John, I love how you remind us about, really the human-centric view and focusing on wellness. I love that. So yeah, to get back to your question, Kirsten, I think where I'll start is with a little story, right? When I came to the Peace Corps, there was another person and they worked, well, I'll just say, they worked in congressional relations, and they're like, I'm like, how do I do this? How do I'm used to walking the halls and, meeting people and building those relationships, very personal. And they had honed these skills over decades of their career. And they were like, I'm not sure how to do this. And so I really took a coaching approach. So it wasn't like, hey, let me give you advice and everything, give them perspective, but ask, okay, well, what is your goal? What do you want to do? I want to build strong relationships. Okay, well, what are some ways that you can do that in the new space, right? And what are some ways that you can learn new skills about how to do this? And it just warmed my heart, because we kind of did at the new year, we had this thing and we were talking about what we learned. And one of the things they said was it wasn't to me, it was just to a larger group, was I learned that I could really make personal connections in a digital workspace. And I was just so happy about it, right? And what do we point out in that? So, what I would tell people is hate to say it, but you got to be a little more self-aware in this hybrid work world, right? You got to know what your needs and wants are. If you're an extrovert, how are you going to meet those needs now that you don't have your coworkers in person? Are there some other factors, communing with neighbors or other things where you can get that energy and get that recharge? If you're an introvert, going back to the question about defaults, we have to redefine those defaults, and it's going to take cognitive load. You're going to have to invest so that in the future, that cognitive load will be reduced, right? And I think it's really important that we take a humble approach and a sort of growth mindset to this environment. Even for me, right? Even though I spent a lot of time working remotely, people said, Thomas, you're already ahead of it. I was like, no, hybrid is 100% different. The default for remote work is I meet you on Zoom, I meet you on Slack, I interact on Slack. The choice is when I get on an airplane and we did do retreats. And Sean, you brought up a great point. The 100% remote workplaces, we at minimum had annual retreats and sometimes quarterly retreats and specific project team gatherings to get stuff done. So it wasn't like the default was to be remote, but we did get together to work shoulder and shoulder, right? And so as we think about hybrid work, what does that mean for the government office spaces we have? How are we going to use those differently, right? And so I could go on and on, but let me plug one of the things I think emerging tech can help us. And I'm sort of in the area of virtual assistants, right? So the default in office work is we're going to meet in person. And the default of remote work is when we wrote, what does hybrid introduce? I'm not sure if this person is going to be in the office, right? Are they like, oh, how do I find out when I look in the calendar if these people will like, well, can we ask a digital assistant and say, hey, find the date, the closest date when all these people will be in the office, and then people can respond. And then the digital assistant says, oh, looks like it's virtual, I'm going to add in a Zoom link, or looks like it's hybrid, I'm going to add in a Zoom link, or whatever. But what are the defaults? Because that cognitive load of figuring out all those things, these are tiny little things, but think of the number of meetings we're in, think of the number of meetings we're scheduling. I think there's a real opportunity for these tools. And there are some in industry, I did use some before, that even looked at focus time. So it would go through the calendars of a whole team and rearrange things. So you'd have back-to-back meetings, but you have 2, 3, 4 hours of focus time to get work done. I think leveraging those technologies and using, and I think the other thing that I'm a little bit new to government, but I feel like we could use our weight with our vendors and push them and let them know about features that we want, because we are paying subscriptions and contracts for them, and it's up on them to keep our business. That's the mentality I come from in terms of subscription services, right? But we need to push and say, hey, this is something we really need, and that's going to really solidify things. But anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they want to know that kind of thing too. So I agree with all of the points you made, knowing yourself, knowing how you work best, relearning how you work best in this environment. It's all so important. So thank you all for sharing those perspectives.
And if I may, Kirsten, I agree 100% with what Thomas just said, and also what Sean said. And I think one thing folks should also understand is the paradigm of the agency you're working for and what works best for that missions agency, right? So again, I think a critical thing I have to remind my staff too is that as much as I'm a huge fan of telework and the ability to be flexible with that telework, our mission is in the national security and IC realm. So not everyone can have a full 100% telework capability. We're going to need folks in the office for certain meetings in the SCIFs and in the secure rooms and whatnot. There are just certain conversations you cannot have over a Zoom or for Gov call or a Teams call or whatnot. You got to do it in person, no electronics, that kind of thing. And so that's just a helpful reminder I want to make sure people understand is that it's not one size fits all. Every agency's mission is a little bit different, and especially with the ones that have a little bit more of a sensitive kind of situation compared to the non-sensitive situation, it's a factor of life, and you as an employee should just be cognizant of, like, when in Rome, do as the Romans do kind of thing. I guess I don't know how to better characterize it than that, but just know your boundaries and understand how to work within the boundaries. But Thomas was spot on. Let's make sure we hold vendors accountable. That is huge. It's a big deal to me. I feel like sometimes the vendors tell me, oh, it can't be done. And then I go and find out it's being done 5 other places. Like, no, it can be done. You just don't know how to do it. So figure out how to do it and get it done.
True. Yeah. Place and time for everything. And from my perspective, I'm excited to get back to eventually when we can have these type of events in person and get to, see everyone face to face. So we are almost out of time for this panel discussion. I've really loved having the conversation with you all, especially our new panelists who I haven't met with until today. But that being said, since ATARC is in the business of connecting people and helping to grow networks, I want to hear from each of you. Where would you like our audience to connect with you? Maybe you're on Twitter, maybe you're on LinkedIn, or maybe there's various different working groups or organizations you're a part of, whatever you want to share with our audience, this would be the time. And any, final thoughts and words of encouragement that you haven't already shared with us. Love to hear from you. And we'll go in the same order. Nagesh, starting with you, please.
I'll put my info in the chat channel so I can give a little bit more time to Thomas and Sean since I had that brief plug. But thank you very much, Thomas. Sean, over to you.
Great, thank you. Sean, next.
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. Won't find me on Facebook, but actually you will. But yeah,
you don't want anyone friending you.
Pardon? Say again?
You don't want anyone friending you on Facebook, though.
Well, yeah, I probably check it once a year. So but,
okay.
My children are a little older now, but it was definitely a platform of choice when they were young. But find me on each of those channels. But in terms of parting advice, really at the end of the day, folks are going back to work on some level, right? We just don't know really what the post-pandemic and what sort of the new defaults are going to be. And Thomas is 100% right on that. What we have to be ready for, though, is the reality that folks are going back on some level and some degree of frequency. And a lot has transpired in the last 2 years that folks are going to expect to have readily available to them in the office. And our traditional offices, a lot of them have been shuttered, for lack of a better description on my part. And much of the technology is not there to support these expectations. I think at the end of the day, obviously we have to be aligned with our human resources team. We have to be aligned with our disability rights organizations. We have to be supportive of all of those pre-existing expectations plus new ones, right? Not least of all, in all likelihood, video capability closer to the desk as opposed to traditional conference rooms. What does that mean? What does that investment look like? And I'm sure most agencies and organizations have already spent time on that, certainly as we have here at the FCC. And I would say, get in front, leverage your partnerships and stakeholder engagements. Certainly, we've all fostered those. Be an active participant, know your human resource policies associated with return to work so that your technology aligns with that. And just be entirely supportive of your teams and staff and be present, right, for this. And that would be my primary. Again, getting back to the basics in that regard.
Over to Thomas.
Yeah, I think, well, first, I'm on LinkedIn primarily, but I'm definitely social media shy. So you may have to figure out how to get in touch with me there, but I am on LinkedIn. And then I guess my parting message is, you can do it. We can figure this out. It's not going to be, it's a journey. It's not a destination. That's how we talk about it in our organization. Like Sean was saying, the equipment might not be there, etc. But, let's figure it out together, right? Because one of the things that, as we return to the office, one of the things that we think we need, we may not actually end up needing, right? And so one of the things is we've got to take this sort of growth mindset and sort of, I feel like it's not, but figure out what the requirements are and figure out what we need, and sort of an agile approach, like making sure that we have those feedback loops and cycles. And that's kind of what we're really paying attention to the Peace Corps. We've set our direction for future of work, but now we're trying to figure out how are we going to implement the listening posts so we can hear the voice of the customer and almost approach it. Someone earlier was taking a product management approach, right? Like how much people actually using these apps that they said they wanted to use, how much our conference rooms are being used, how much bandwidth is being used, and how do we need to manage that? But like really looking at the data, measuring that, and taking a product management approach to it is like, we want a great experience at work. How do we work with, as Sean said, HR, facilities, et cetera, and then make all that happen? So just take a growth mindset approach to it. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think I forgot our last poll question, so I'm going to pop that up on the screen real quick. How is your agency's current status as a workforce? So you can answer fully remote, hybrid, or back in person. And with that, I just want to thank all of our panelists today, our keynote speaker, and our tech talks. Our partners specifically at Anchor, Pure Storage, and Zimperium for partnering with us and helping us bring this content to you all at home. It's been such a blast today. I really appreciate everyone who showed up. And lastly, we do have one final poll question. This is just to ensure that we send you your CPE certification if you would like it to be emailed to you. So go ahead and answer it. With that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and I look forward to connecting with you all again in the near future, I hope. And don't forget to go and register for our next upcoming webinar, January 26th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, for leveraging predictive analytics to address climate change issues. That should be a very interesting conversation. So hope to see you all there, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, Kirsten. Take care.
You too.
Thanks, Sean.